Ever since its reveal in 2020, Black Myth Wukong has been an alluring project. The developer, Game Science, has been surprisingly open in comparison to other AAA developers, and the game's apparent ambitions, I feel, have been reinforced with each and every press release. It's a hero-focused action game, retelling the story of Journey to the West in a linear fashion, and it aims to be a graphical tour de force utilizing Unreal Engine's latest features. And not just standard Unreal. On PC, it is utilizing the NVIDIA branch of that engine to enable full ray tracing, as it is called, which holds the promise of an even more impressive graphical presentation. So in today's video covering that PC version, I will ask and answer the questions: have Game Science lived up to the graphical hype from that first trailer? How is the full RT implementation on PC? And lastly, what performance tips do I have for people who are going to play the game? So enough monkey business here, let's get right into it. Right when the game starts up, it is almost immediately apparent that Game Science has lived up to that original trailer and gone beyond it. The intro to this game seriously dazzles with the things you're seeing there. There are titanic, mythical beings lording over you, and the entire area is replete with unique volumetric rendering that is unfortunately kind of rare in the modern age. With each and every dash, staff swipe, and bit of movement, the main character and his nemesis distort and move the physical volume of fog that they find themselves in. Beyond Housemarque's Returnal and some legacy PhysX titles, real physicalized particles like this are an absolute rarity in games, and Game Science made sure to use this GPU-intensive effect in effective ways to add a mystical flourish to distinct game moments like this one, or specific character entrances. It is flashy for sure, but darn if it does not look amazing. Interesting particle effects such as these can be found throughout the game actually, often accentuating the combat, letting you know what an enemy is about to do, or it will reward you with some nice particles for successfully defeating an enemy. Sometimes particle effects can be tackily added on top of a game's presentation, looking a bit out of place. But here I feel, in this game, they are always well situated in the theme and in the environments you find yourself in. The areas you will move and play through in Black Myth Wukong are also an exceptional highlight in the game's presentation. And there are a number of technical components which bring these scenes together. The first of which is an Unreal Engine 5 hallmark, and that is nanite. Due to nanite, the ground, incidental detail, and architecture of the game shows off a very high level of geometric density. At average camera height and distance, you would be very troubled to find any geometric edges on almost any surface you can find in the game due to nanite's automatic and ever-changing level of detail. Similarly, you will not often see intrusive pop-in due to that automated level of detail on almost any geometry in the game. So this game will tend to have a more solid look than you might see in other previous generation titles. That does not mean there is no pop-in though. Owing to the original Unreal Engine 5.0 vintage here, nanite is not used on vegetation rather noticeably, and it will have visible consequences. For one, you will see bushes, leaves, and other shrubbery like we see here, showcasing typical level of detail changes that games have had since, well, forever. The second negative aspect of vegetation not using nanite is that the game forgoes virtual shadow maps. Virtual shadow maps are more expensive on non-nanite geometry, and given how much of this game takes place in dense forest areas where most of the geometry on screen is probably going to be vegetation, well, I presume the developers here made a hard performance choice and chose not to use VSMs. As a result, without full RT on, you will see a lot more shadow issues than you've seen in other UE5 titles. There's always a very distinct shadow cascade line you can see on shadows near the main character, and any shadows after a really close distance tend to heavily blob out or show other instabilities. I presume this will affect the PlayStation 5 version when that is analyzed, but at least on PC, if you have a ultra high-end PC, you can use the full RT option, and this uses full geometric ray tracing. That will get rid of the usual cascaded shadow map issues. Up close, you will no longer see that obvious cascade line in front of the character as he moves forward. And at a distance, shadows will not be universally blobby or prone to types of flicker. So there is a solution for shadow issues on PC, although it is a very expensive one, as I will talk about later. In spite of those slight negative aspects in the presentation, Nanite is a great asset to the game's assets, and it is the foundation upon which the game's extremely dense environments are built. The glue holding the environmental detail together, though, is the ray tracing. Without using the full RT option, the game will utilize software Lumen on PC for diffuse global illumination and for specular reflections. With the full RT option on, there is a raster-based path tracing in use, which adds in a lot of extra lighting detail. A huge portion of the game takes place out of direct sunlight, in shadow. And thanks to Lumen or path tracing, all the craggy overhangs, shadowy corners, or sunlit entrances will look incredible. The indirect lighting detail is generally high and superb, and in a number of areas, I really can't imagine them physically working without ray tracing in use here. We have talked a lot about Lumen before on the channel, and this title, like other UE5 titles, is a big showcase for it. But how does full RT enhance this experience? When looking at diffuse lighting, that is the lighting on rough surfaces, there will be some core differences there. Since full RT uses high quality geometry instead of signed distance fields, it will often show off more fine detail in the local lighting. With software Lumen, as we can see here, smaller plants, bushes, or leaves are not represented in the tracing detail, and they're only captured in screen space. So they will often look a bit monotone in shading and look undershaded. With full RT, nearly all of that fine detailed geometry is being traced against, so you'll see fine shadowing there in indirectly lit areas, or small bounce lighting detail on plants, which make them better situated into their surroundings and just looking higher fidelity in the end in comparison to the software Lumen path. If you were just running through the game at full pace, you might not notice such details, but if you take the time to breathe in these gorgeous environments, well then full RT is a great addition there. Another upgrade from full RT comes in the form of less over-darkening. Since signed distance fields are sort of blobby for sparse things like trees, they tend to over-obscure the light, giving some areas an overly dark look. With full RT, the greater accuracy means less over-darkening, so more skylight will come through, often brightening up those areas with per-pixel precision. Either that, or you will see some more local sunlight bouncing around, like we can see here. The difference will be subtle though, and without side-by-sides, I doubt many people would know they're missing much with software Lumen. The biggest difference from full RT comes with specular lighting, or reflections as they're often called. On rough surfaces like stone as we see here, the material is more accurately represented as the tracing is done with less simplifications. So you'll see more surface detail from that indirect lighting on any given rough surface. The biggest difference though will be found in the game's water, of which there's a lot of it. With software Lumen, an absolute majority of reflection detail on water is captured with SSR, so characters are not reflected as we can see here with this character. And also you will notice that particles are disappearing in the reflection here when out of screen space. So anything that you will see out of screen space though will look very blobby and update slowly as we can see here. That slight movement you can see in the reflection there is supposed to be the waterfall moving. Yeah, it's not too great looking. The biggest issue though with software Lumen from this is that anything that is obscured will have disocclusion issues. With the character jumping here, you see a large outline on the water surface from those areas where just SSR is failing, and it's constantly moving. With full RT on, it'll look to get rid of such issues. With the character jumping, as we can see here, there are absolutely zero issues when he obscures background detail. No disappearing reflections. And out of screen space, it's easy to see how the world reflected in that reflection is constantly updating per frame. Much more detailed, and it also includes things like particles. Nothing is missing from the reflections. This is a bit surprising to me since the game uses nanite, and reflecting details from nanite is a hard task. I've only found one instance where the geometry being traced against was misaligned with what was being reflected. This tree here in this game opening area. The smaller branches appear to be missing in the reflection, though curiously other instances of this same tree model I found did not have this issue. That is great, as it means the full RT option in this game in nearly all views will always look superior to Software Lumen without any glaring areas of oversight or visual trade-off. For the keen-eyed among you, you may have already noticed the last larger lighting upgrade from Full RT, and that is the upgrade from real-time ray-guided caustics. Any body of water in the game will show off a dynamic caustic effect, where light is redirected by the surface of the water and you'll see it relighting the surrounding areas, like the rock above the water here. Or it will relight the area below the water surface, showing undulating patterns on the floor of the game's streams or ponds. This undulating pattern aligns with the water's surface deformation, so your character moving through it or interacting with it will cause the caustic presentation to change. It will morph and ripple just like the water surface above it. It absolutely elevates the water presentation in my eyes, and it makes a number of the boss fights, for example, look extra special, as all of their animations and yours cause these secondary effects in the environment due to those caustics moving around. The difference between Software Lumen here will depend on how deep the pool of water is and how much shadowing there is. If a pool of water is shallow and well lit by the sun, like we see here, then the caustic effect will contribute a lot more lighting to the scene, which will dramatically change the water's surface versus the stock look. If the water is deep and in shadow, then the caustics will realistically be less apparent, and the water will look much more similar between the two different versions of the game. Either way, real-time caustic lighting is very rare to see in games, and I applaud the developers here for adding it in a way which enhances the presentation. It doesn't look very tacked on. There's a lot of water in this game too, so it elevates many areas of the game. Beyond bullet point engine tech features, there are a few other areas that Black Myth Wukong really excels in. Environmental interaction is one of them. It's often subtle yet effective. Each and every plant in the game will showcase nice shakes, sways, or rattles when characters collide with them. It's a small detail, but one that is greatly appreciated when you do notice it. Same with the bits of scenery destruction that is in there. You can find the genre-typical exploding pots here, but there are also some other details such as exploding pillars or fences and handrails that fall apart when you walk by or interact with them. Character rendering is another highlight in this game here, but once again, it's just kind of a nice bonus on top of an otherwise already gorgeous package. The designs are fantastical and rarely attempt to look human, but when combined with cinematic flourishes like depth of field, the characters can look breathtaking in the game's various cutscenes, which, by the way, there's actually not a whole lot of cutscenes in this game in my experience. Thankfully though, outside of cutscenes, enemy character models will have a similar, if not the same level of detail, with ultra high quality textures, geometry, and a heck of a lot of cool secondary animation, usually from particle effects or clumps of fur. As you can probably tell by my description, Black Myth Wukong is an incredible looking game on PC and easily one of the best looking games that has come out this year. But that does not mean everything is perfect. Nanite is adding a lot of detail, but some textures are not always up to snuff. There could be some really high quality texture like we see on the left here, while the rock face on the right is noticeably stretched and lower quality. Another issue is that the game has a post-processing quirk that I do not like. It is over-sharpened, and this doesn't have to do with the game using DLSS or anything like that. The devs must be using Unreal's default sharpening somewhere in the pipeline here, and it is jacked up really high, so things that are flushed against a white background will have a noticeable outlined look to them. That sharpening also contributes to a general crunchy look in this game's visuals, and that is also exacerbated by the game's extensive use of temporal dithering. Hair looks dithered and aliased. Same with the game's motion blur. This then causes very obvious flickering around the main character, for example, as he moves. All of those aspects contribute to the game looking less stable in motion than it ought to. I would really like an option here to disable sharpening or run things at full resolution, non-dithered. But truly the biggest issue with Black Myth Wukong lies in its performance, and this is unfortunately typical Unreal stuff. Though not everything. I can happily report that the game on start has a lengthy shader precompilation sequence that is long on a big high-end CPU like the Ryzen 7 7800X3D, so it is crunching a lot of shaders. And thankfully to that, I don't see what appears to be extensive shader compilation stuttering happening in-game. That doesn't seem to be the issue here in my experience with what I have recorded. The devs have done a good job with that, better than most other Unreal Engine devs. Rather, the game does have a big traversal stutter issue. Yes, every Unreal Engine game has this. Here it is not the worst I have seen, but it's also not the best I've seen. Basically, every time you go into a new area, there will be a huge frame time spike that disrupts the game flow. Sometimes there can be multiple in a row, actually. With full RT off, that spike in frame time will be big and very noticeable. With full RT on, it is proportionally bigger, and these will absolutely disrupt the game flow and are off-putting. When running around, they can also just kind of happen to occur at times, and I'm not sure why they are happening. This will happen with or without full RT on, so there'll just be random frame time spikes there. I think the worst thing that can happen though is that some of those invisible loading lines in the game can correspond with locations in the game world where a combat can occur. Thus, they can disrupt play in those areas, and that is a big no-no for me. It is not as bad as Jedi Survivor, I would say, but gosh, it is annoying that running across even small little areas like this courtyard here can reliably trigger this frame time issue each and every time you go from one side to another. Unreal Engine is truly my bane at this moment, and this game is another one to add to the list of StutterStruggle in this regard. A compounding issue for this is that the full RT option will also add frame time spikes in its own right, making the game less smooth than it could potentially be. In this comparison here with full RT on the right and software Lumen on the left, I want you to pay attention to the frame time graph in the bottom right. I have limited the range on the graph there to highlight the issue. The full RT here has periodic frame time spikes up to and around 60 milliseconds when running through the world. They happen a bit with software Lumen, but it is occurring more often with full RT. This is all happening on a Ryzen 7 7800X3D. And that means two things. For one, if you are aiming for a smooth 60 FPS with full RT on, you can only have the best processor available and nothing else will cut it. Secondly, it means to get a smooth presentation here, you will probably need VRR, and you will also need frame rate capping to around 60 FPS. That will probably turn people off. If you otherwise use an uncapped frame rate with something like DLSS 3 frame generation, well then the disparity between frame times and the spikes will be even larger and arguably even more obvious. So yeah, that is not great at all. In the end, this means that only the biggest PCs should use full RT there, and that's mainly due to CPU performance, though it is very expensive on the GPU as well. An RTX 4090, even at 40% of 4K resolution scaling DLSS, could dip into the 40s in this game while being GPU limited. Yeah, it's very heavy. Basically, unless you have the best kit out there, I can only recommend turning full RT off, and you should use software Lumen as the game provides. I have one last performance tip. If you want better performance on your GPU, do not use the game's cinematic preset quality. The cinematic preset in Unreal Engine is usually hidden away, only meant for cinematics. Rather, start with the high quality preset 2 steps below that and work up some settings to very high that you think need to look better. And with that, you'll get a good looking game that runs a good deal better, I imagine. And with that, that's really all I can say here about Black Myth Wukong on PC at the moment. It is an incredibly gorgeous game, but is one with some problems. I really want the developer to do as much as possible to improve frame time stability, as otherwise this incredible game will be overshadowed due to these issues, I think. And really, it is an incredible game. The gameplay is top-notch and the presentation is otherworldly. So I'd really like them to fix it. From what I understand, the game will be getting patches though, and I assume that they will try to address this in due course, and perhaps they will also add something like DLSS ray reconstruction as well with patches. As of right now, the game currently does not use it and uses some other denoiser, and I'd like that option here. Beyond that, this game's heavy profile on PC, especially on the CPU, makes me wonder what the heck that PS5 version is going to be like. We'll cover that as soon as we can here at DF, so keep your eyes open. Anyway, if you did like this video, like, subscribe, ring the bell, comment below, support on Patreon, follow on Twitter, and as always, this is Alex, bin you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.
You have some cheap tricks. Meet me at the summit if you dare!